I realized that physiology is first before psychology. And I think if I go back to the career in which I had, if I could talk to that person again, I would have reversed everything that I was doing. When I was trying to get out of my mind, I tried to work in my mind. And I've learned over years that that's not necessarily the access points to better thinking or better psychology. I think it's still this day. I still think it's physiology first. And if the foundation of what's all internally functioning well, the byproduct of that should be healthier thinking.
Welcome to the Captains and Coaches Podcast. We explore the art and the science of leadership through the lens of athletics and beyond. Today's episode is a breath of fresh air as we welcome Harvey Martin, a remarkable individual whose journey from professional baseball player to human performance coach exemplifies the power of reinvention and self-discovery. Harvey's personal battle with the yips became the catalyst for his pioneering approach to human performance, one that prioritizes physiology as the foundation for psychological mastery. Through his groundbreaking work with breathwork, nervous system regulation, and embodied awareness, Harvey has revolutionized how athletes connect with their bodies and unlock their highest potential. In this conversation, we'll explore the philosophy behind his books, Breathe, Focus, Excel, and Without Words, Mastering the Art of Being, uncovering how the journey from who we were to who we are to who we can be applies not just to elite athletes, but anyone seeking to transcend their self-imposed limitations. Now, let's take a deep breath in and hand it off to Harvey. Ready, and break. I am sitting with Harvey Martin, author, 2 books. The one I have in hand here is Without Words, and there's a little meaning behind that. That is a journey or perspective and growth, and that's the name of the game. What I've come to learn about you through reading and listening to your podcast, Moment with Mart on Spotify. Spotify is my go-to. You've got a great journey, philosophy. So I almost want to lead us to this point without words and start strong with your athletic career. So, I mean, even collegiate athlete into professional baseball, that really helped unlock this mission and vision that you have now with your show, not podcast, right?
Yeah.
You're with your show.
Yeah.
And then in the content that you're putting out now.
Yeah, man. Beautiful. I appreciate the introduction and the segue from, I like the vantage point of kind of starting from myself as a player and to where I've been now. It's hard, right? I've actually talked to the athletes that I work with now. Sometimes we'll bring up my playing days just briefly. And I think this parlays into how I wrote the last book, Without Words, is that I know that I played sports and I know that I was a professional athlete at some point. I can't remember that part of my life in the sense of it does feel like a material death in a way in which I've just moved on, and I think that is a lot of how I wrote the last book, Without Words, and a lot of what my perspective is in teaching and philosophy and how we come to grips with what we do for a living. But if I go back in time and just tangibilize playing for a second, I grew up in Michigan. I was really successful all the way through. I went to Central Michigan, played there for a few years. I actually went to Central Michigan for 4 years and got my degree there. And I had a red shirt freshman year, and then I was a Tommy John medical red shirt. So I ended up playing 2 of the 4 years there, and that's how I got that degree. And then I transferred to Minnesota State, Mankato, and I think a lot of that is what led me educationally into what I do now for a living, and with the books that I've written and a lot of the transformation, I suppose, of the content that I've created over the years. Because, and I've shared this a lot in the past, when I went to Minnesota State, they had I'm drawing a blank. It was the Performance Center. And if I'm wrong, I apologize to Minnesota State, but it was a sport performance center that was highlighting sports psychology. And to my knowledge, in 2012, 2013, when I was getting there, it was brand new. I think I was actually one of the first 3 or 4 athletes. I might have even been the first Adam Thielen, who was one of
Yeah.
them, who I know he's obviously gone on to have a great NFL career. But we were in this like early pocket of athletes who were dipping our toes into this sports psychology, and they were offering essentially like free sessions for the athletes at Minnesota State. And ironically, the lady, Cynthia Kampov, who started this, she was a professor at the university, and I took a class with her in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to graduate school because I had to. As I just told you, I went to 4 years at CMU, and then I was trying to get drafted and play professionally. So I had to go to grad school just from an eligibility standpoint. I had no intentions of getting a master's degree or really diving deep into sports psychology, right? But I took this class because it was centered around goal setting and vision training and
Yeah.
psychology. And I just figured, okay, it's 2012 spring. I have this free access and resources to mental skills, which is right across from where I lived and right across from all the classes I was taking. So it made a lot of sense. Graduate school was less demanding in terms of time from what I remember than undergrad. So I had a lot more time to sort of train and go to class and work with people. And I considered the spring of 2012 to how can I utilize all these resources solely to get drafted. And that was the point. It was like, oh, I'd rather learn about my brain and goal setting than any other course if I have to be in class. Right. And
Yeah.
so, but the irony of this was I found out that for the first time in my life, educationally, it was the first time I was curious to go to class.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't find that as like relevant for years later. But I think that I really connected with psychology in 2012, and we'll call it the mental side of sports. I didn't know what it was going to grow into, but that was when it kind of came to me. And then I got signed as a free agent. I went to the Milwaukee Brewers. I played with the Brewers for 3 years. And this is where I think I know a lot of my work is curated from this experience, because in 2015, I got released and I had the yips, which is a performance anxiety, which I'm sure a lot of people on your and who listen to you and your fans and guests and whatnot are familiar with this concept because it's very relevant in sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I acquired essentially the yips, which was like a slow building phase. I was getting this like slow anxiety buildup, and I didn't understand what was going on. And it started in spring training in 15, and then it really materialized at around the draft period in June. And honestly, I couldn't, I mean, people who were around would know, but I couldn't throw a baseball like at all. It was a really crazy experience. I just lost the ability to throw a ball, and I couldn't throw it anywhere in the vicinity of a strike zone. So as you can imagine, you're going to get released from professional sports if you can no longer perform the thing in
No.
which they're paying you to do. And so I got released. And the irony of being released for performance anxiety, and why I told the story about me training in psychology, was I was sort of this older, I was 26. I was right before I turned 26. I'll call it 26. It was right before my 26th birthday. I was perceived as this like veteran in the minor league clubhouses that I was in, psychologically sound, all these things, educated. You know how that gets
Yeah.
perceived in those environments. And so then I had to try to figure out, well, then how is my mind the thing that just took me out of the game? I was studying sports psychology in college. I understand these things more than supposedly other people. I'm more educated, supposedly. And all of a sudden, I can't play because
Mm-hmm.
of my mind. And that was just extremely humbling. We can just put it that way. And you feel very vulnerable. But I think the mixture of vulnerability and humility, it really was needed, because the the next few months, and this is where I think my story sort of is imprinted in a lot of the things in which I've shared over the last decade, is that I'd met a friend of mine who did breathwork, and his partner at the time, now wife, she did sound bathing. She was a meditation teacher from Japan. She did a lot of the stuff. I believe she did a lot of monastery work in India for many years, traveled just like a world traveler, super deep into yoga, unbelievable person, Omina. And she's actually been my healer she's done a lot of energy work on me over the years, and I have great respect for her. But they introduced me to this like new, at the time, this new lifestyle, this new holistic presentation of tools that I had no comprehending of at all. It had nothing to do with the psychological stuff that I was learning at all. And it was so drastically different. And like I said, I was in that stage of humility and vulnerability. So it just was like, whatever, like, take me, do what
Yeah.
you need to do. I'll do whatever. Right. And so I followed this breathing practice, which is Tumo meditation, which is essentially popularized by Wim Hof, which is fast hyperventilative breathing with holds. And I think that that's extremely normal for especially nowadays in our generations, because it's very deep feeling breathing practices. And I think anything that we feel, we connect with in the 21st century. But I did that. I did that for about, if I can remember correctly, around 16 weeks, whatever. It was the whole fall into the winter. And then in 2015, in the winter in Minnesota, I did no heat source. And then my goal was to sit in the water of Minnesota, which is freezing, obviously. So we cut holes in the ice. I sat in the ice and I did the whole bit, did my breathing, trained my breath work, trained my physiology, and sat in the water. And I did that I had a buddy who was going to watch me. We were nervous, scared. At the time I thought that was death. Like, you
Yeah.
can't do that in the middle of the winter. Right. But so we did all the prep work. We had all the supervision, etc. And, I how to explain the moment that I did that in 2015, you can't. That to me is my own understanding, which is titled Without Words. That's my understanding. If I could connect it to anybody, that was when I met God, right? The universe opened up to me, whatever. I had my enlightening, awakening experience. And really what I remember is that I, for the first time in a few years, or really what I could comprehend as an adult, I felt present. And I think the presence came from and comes from the coupling of everything that's involved with those scenarios. Extreme cold, so you're extremely immersed into your nervous system. Breath work, so you are in tune with your senses. I'm in nature, so I'm getting sunlight. I have wind hitting me. I can see the trees and the water. And even as I sort of paint the picture, I'm sure we can all relate to how beautiful it is when we're immersed in nature. And so I think that the accumulation of all those things, it was so deeply impactful to me. That's not even a think, it was, because that's what made me create a career in this. But I looked back at that and I was looking at my life logically. I was a released minor league baseball player who signed for $500. Minor league baseball players make no money. So I was broke. I was sleeping in my buddy's closet for a year and a half. Shout out Steve McGuigan, one of the best guys ever, owner of MASH Performance up in Minneapolis. But I was sleeping there and I just thought to myself, like, why wouldn't I chase that feeling I just had? Why would I go try to get a job or try to do anything materially when I've been in this anxious, depressive state for the last year? Why would I do anything but try to understand what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for me, I had a pretty decent network of professional athletes and friends that I could dive into the Rolodex, and I could use a lot of the networks and connections that they had. And I pieced everything together over the next 3-4 years. I put together a podcast. I used professional athletes to get doctors and trainers onto the podcast. And that was a way to freely learn. I didn't have the money to pay for coaching or anything like that. So I was freely getting information like that. And I traveled. I
Yeah.
found people around the country. When I did get a couple money, a couple pocket in my pocket, I went to Amsterdam and met with some coaches over there and some teachers, and just started like doing the thing. Obviously I stayed with Daniel Wilson and Omina and worked with them regularly. And I think what came about that experience, what really curated over the next couple of years, is now what my work is tangibly. And what I mean by that is my perspective towards psychology had changed,
Mm-hmm.
because my understanding, and it still remains to this day, my understanding of how we think perceivably in our mind and how our conscious like decision making works is based off of our body. And so therefore I came into the perspective, and right before we press play, we're talking about perspective expanding or perspective shifting. My perspective had now shifted through doing things tangibly and seeing things change really and objectively. And I saw my mind changing. I realized that physiology is first before psychology. And I think if I go back to the career in which I had, if I could talk to that person again, right at whatever that is, I would have reversed everything that I was doing. When I was trying to get out of my mind, I tried to work in my mind. And I've learned over years that that's not necessarily the access points to better thinking or better psychology. I think it's still this day. I still think it's physiology first. You do very tangible, objective, simplified foundational practices and keep it yourself principles are sound and you're healthy. And if the foundation of what's all internally functioning well, the byproduct of that should be healthier thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
thinking has to remain subjective. So can I say that you will be this type of thinker? No. But I think that if I could have been a better breather, had a stronger nervous system, understood principles such as sleep, the importance of recovery and those sort of things, and relayed that into my playing career. I obviously hypothetical, can't say this is accurate at all, but I would imagine that I wouldn't have experienced performance anxiety, which materialized into the yips. I think that I would have been able to sustain a little bit longer playing career. But all that stuff, and obviously that's a long-winded story, but that's, that's the thing.
That's why we're here.
All those things are what made me who I am today, I suppose.
Time out. Every so often I receive messages that remind me why we created the Old Bull program. Today I want to share Kevin's story with you, not just because it showcases physical transformation, but because it represents what's possible when training evolves beyond just sets and reps. Kevin recently reached out with a message that captures the essence of what we're building. Here we go. Hey Tex, this is Kevin from Old Bull. Just wanted to shoot you a quick text to say I'm really digging the program and seeing great results. Made a few dietary tweaks, up my protein for one, but through the training I've been seeing more muscle and strength gain with infinitely less pain in the process than probably any other point in my lifting career. I recently got together with some friends I hadn't seen in a couple years, and every one of them made a comment about how they'd never seen me looking bigger or stronger than I do now. Appreciate the program and what you're doing to make it excellent. Here's what really matters. This isn't about quick fixes or unsustainable programs. Old Bull is engineered for the experienced lifter who values longevity as much as they do intensity. We're talking about intelligent progression that respects your body's signal while constantly pushing your boundaries. If you're ready to transform your training into something more sustainable, more intelligent, and ultimately more impactful, the Old Bull program is your path forward. Click the link in the show notes and take control of your strength journey today. A necessary sacrifice moment, evil if you will, that you are able to redirect into education to now empower thousands of athletes. So it is a small sacrifice, and you didn't let it define you. That's why I love and appreciate this. And then the concept where healthy physiology, that's the foundation of strong psychology. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
In a sense. And then as a performance coach over here, utilizing the weight room to teach a lot of lessons, behavior, resiliency, stick-to-itiveness, grit. Now this puts me in a position to start also educating on the physiology. Hey, this is what's going on in your body. So no matter if they're high school or college, opening up that door for them and understanding this is motivating for me.
Beautiful.
And so you worked hard to establish a network and foundation, and you were in an entrepreneurial phase. I always struggle with that word, even as a
no worries. I struggle with many words.
Without words. So now you were able to take this network, build a brand, and then create an opportunity with you professionally with the San Francisco Giants, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, that was amazing. I just finished my 4th year there. I'm back independent and sort of entrepreneurially. I'll hammer it. I was nervous to go into that, so I wanted to get out of the way and say it right away. But entrepreneurially, yeah, I'm back into my independent space, which is why you're seeing a lot of the new shows and new content. And obviously, I'm consistently kind of producing and creating, which feels so much at home for me. And I've always known that. No disrespect to the last couple of years. I loved coaching and being in Major League Sports. How could you not? What was cool about the Giants experience, and I just recently answered this, so it's fresh on my brain. But as I told that story, and it was about a three-year discovery period from 3 years is fair, 2016 to about 2018, 2019 is when I was doing all of those exploration, trying to learn, trying to study, trying to do all this stuff, and trying to understand physiology and anatomy, et cetera, et cetera. And also my own life, like what am I doing for a career? In 2019, I started I wouldn't, by no means was I financially having any success. Was my business going off the charts? We were about 2 years in the podcast. I had, every now and then I'd have a college bring me in and I'd do a presentation or I'd work with a group, whatever. And you know how that works. You're kind of building up, you just take whatever you can get. And I was sort of surviving. I had a bunch of little odd jobs here and there. And in 2018, I started working with pro athletes, and I was doing it free for the first year, really. 2019, I started charging slightly, and then 2020, where the Giants is going to come into this story. This is when things really took off for me professionally, which was wild to experience looking back at it. But I was in this space, training people, working with people, and in I can't remember, I'm losing the dates, but so I'm going to move on from the dates so I can just tell the story. But I was in the November-ish era, and I left all these side jobs, and I told one of my buddies back to Mass Performance, the other owner, Tom Buski, who are still my best friends, but I was working teaching pitching there and coaching high school kids, and I had a couple odd jobs. I was scouting with the Milwaukee Brewers. I was working at universities coaching baseball, etc. And I had told Tom, I said, hey, I need like 5 months of these hourly jobs of working with you to pay my rent. And we just worked the math out so I could cover my rent and pay these things. And I was like, by March 15th, I'm out and I'm going full time on my old company. It was called the Mindstrong Project. And I'm going to go all in on it. And we were struggling financially. So I had to kind of mentally, I was the owner. I had to go kind of save this thing that we had. And so he agreed to it. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, I remember waking up crying March 16th on 2020 because a world pandemic has taken place.
Right.
And so I leave all my jobs, and my first day working, COVID strikes.
Bam.
And that was a wild experience. I had a mobile sauna. I was taking cold tubs to gyms. That was my business. So to be a mobile sauna breathing job in a respiratory world pandemic era, you're not working well.
No.
So life was incredibly terrifying, and the Giants are nowhere even close into the picture yet. But what happened, which was really fascinating, was everybody had time. If you remember those days, no one was working, no one was anywhere. So spring training was shut down, Major League Baseball was shut down, NHL was shut down, all these things were shut down. And I had a decent following at that point, and I'd sort of been in the game for a few years now, like making podcasts, showing content. And I started getting DMs from Major League athletes, and I didn't know them. So It was different. It was different than the buddies that I was working with or helping and not charging. And so I took this opportunity, and about 3 months into COVID, I actually had a full sustaining, profitable coaching consulting business because I was able to explain how to use nature and use things at your home in that helped you perform. And that summer blew up for me. Obviously we kind of limped back into working with people, and I was working in the NHL at this time. And about a year later, I had a full blown successful career happening, and the Giants came in about a year later and interviewed me to be the director of mental skills at the time. I wasn't credible in anything. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have certain scenarios that they were looking for, but they interviewed me. I took it and went the distance. And afterwards, I didn't get the job. And the next day, Gabe Kapler called me and just said, would you want to consult? And we'll call you a breathing specialist. And what does that look like to you? And I took that role And in 2021, I was a breathing consultant for the San Francisco Giants, and I actually signed 3 or 4 different contracts that year because they were not sure how I was going to fit in with the clubhouse. So it was all
Mhm.
with the major league team, and it was, we're going to do camp to All-Star break, and then I re-signed because that was kind of like my first tryout. Then we went All-Star break to the end of the season, and then we did the playoffs. We ended up having 107 wins that year and set a franchise record. It was remarkable. And then that next offseason, I kind of went full time, and I went full time for a 3-year stint in 22, 23, 24. And the breathing consultant became the human performance coach. And that was really fun. So now I leave my company, my family and I move out to San Francisco, and I was working full time in a major league with a major league team in the major league clubhouse. And I was able to now get outside of the breathing thing, and I could do all the things I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I was able to use sauna and cold with the guys. We were able to do sound breathing or sound bathing and with breath work and grounding and walks. And we had a nature van. I'd take the boys out into nature in the cities we were in. And that was a super fun, right? I got to expand into this entire performance aspect. And it was a really monumental time for me because I got to stop being an entrepreneur, which I really wanted to stop being an entrepreneur. That was, it sounds so beautiful, the story I just told on the surface, and it was, and it's great, and I love it. But it was so stressful for so many years, and doing that stuff, even when I was having success, it was almost as equally as stressful as it was when it was tough. It just was it was something where I felt like I was being pulled and working with so many people that the Giants was like a slowdown period.
Mhm.
And the slowdown period allowed me to only focus on the guys in front of me. I didn't have to build a business. I wasn't concerned with making a brand. And that was when I wrote the 2 books, because Breathe, Focus, Excel came out in 2023. Without Words came out this December in 2024. And it was just that was an amazing last 3 years. I'm coming out of that now, and I feel different, obviously, with a new perspective change. But that gave me time to focus on one thing, know that I had a paycheck coming, know I had one team I wanted to work with. These are the guys that I ride with. This is the staff that I work with. And all my off time I got to write. And the writing has really taken shape beautifully for me, because it's like an accumulation of the last 10 years of thinking and
Mhm.
reading and studying, that I can now just be alone and get thoughts out on the paper. And so I really enjoyed that process. I don't know if that answered the question, but I think that at least paints the picture, I suppose.
Yeah, and Anne has set up a lot more questions. I
Mm,
do want to spend some time with the at-home tools, so we can give
yeah.
some practical nuggets to take away. So I'm outside of Austin, and we just had a winter storm. We usually get one
Yeah.
a year. So now I pulled out the old ice bath, and then
Yeah.
I've been fortunate. I sauna at least five nights a week. I got a buddy who runs
Okay.
and started his own sauna company, The Hot Box. It's amazing. So
Nice.
it gets up to
Yeah.
220, a little toasty in there, and took
Yeah.
Without Words in there the past 2 weeks, and then uh, yeah, diving into the ice bath. I had put that off since last winter, just because, I
Yeah.
mean, it gets from 20. I'd say our degree range is 20 to 120 here in Hill Country,
Wow.
Texas. So just summer, keeping that thing cold. I'm too cheap, so I just
That's wild.
freeze water bottles and throw it in there. Um, but
Nice.
meaningful for this podcast, for me to like, all right, let's get back in there. And I'm looking out my window here at this beautiful view. So I just plopped down in the ice and tried to 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 ponder, to think about the messages from your book while I'm freezing my butt off for 3 minutes. And
Yeah.
uh yeah, it's fun because 220 is no joke. So I've forced
No.
myself to breathe. I've removed podcasts. I used to listen to podcasts in there just to distract myself. Now it's just books
Mm-hmm.
and breath. Um,
Mm.
so for folks that are just getting into this mindset, what are those tools where you introduce to athletes virtually that they can start to
Yeah.
apply at home and really start on this path that you've set out on yourself and empowered others to take this journey as well?
Yeah. That's a marvelous question. I really enjoy that. I think that it's easy to, I'm going to start broad here and I'm going to narrow it right to the breath specifically, because I think it's easy to look at all the modalities that we have access to, and we can pick and choose them, and they're on the street everywhere you go. You can't go anywhere now from my perspective, you can't go anywhere in big cities around the country and not see a sauna and ice facility or a red light facility or a stim machine or a PEMP machine. Like you have access to all of these modalities, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. I know this is somewhat of a harsh take. I don't think it's a harsh take. It seems like that sometimes, but a lot of this is commercially driven, which is fine. We're a society that needs resources, and we have businesses and those sort of things. But the broadness of commercialization, I think, makes this seem very confusing. And I think the need of confusion is needed, because that means that you need to reach outside of yourself to acquire whatever you're seeking, right? And that's where I think there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not arguing that, or good or bad. All I'm saying is that if you cut through commerce and you go to art of self, art of understanding, art of recovery, art of advancement, well, breathing is the one controllable that we all have that is incredibly free. It's a real-time HRV for you. It's your governor of state. It controls your upregulatory and downregulatory state. It controls emotional behavior, cognitive recognition, retention of information, all these things. Breathing is the foundational principle that I think you should take into all these availabilities that you have. And that's why, like, for me, I liked you saying, like, I don't listen to the podcast anymore, or I don't do this in the sauna. And it's not that that's a good or bad thing. It's just that the sauna is a heat stressor that triggers an awareness to breath. But the breath is the whole point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the cold. Cold is so remarkably beautiful as a teacher because it's so penetrable to the nervous system. When we're in extreme cold, when it's uncomfortable, now there's some incredible things happening to the endorphins, sure. And there's the need of the cortisol, sure. There's a dopamine effect that we clearly need to get now in modern society because we're not getting natural dopamine. So I completely understand that 100%. But when you are in an uncomfortable cold and the shock of that, and everyone knows this, you can go into a cold shower and you'll see how immediate that is. You don't get that in the sauna, right? The sauna immediacy comes at the end, not in the very beginning. The cold tub gets you instantly. And so that's like a real-time trigger into where you are currently at. And I think a lot of times with athletes specifically is they marry the protocols, they marry the objectiveness, and they don't marry their awareness to breath. They don't marry the recognition of how they're perceiving these stressors going on around them. For example, I see often, there's Susanna Soberg had research come out of the Scandinavian countries about the 12-minute baseline of cold exposure each week. That was kind of the practical thing, right, that you should be able to have around 12 minutes a week, right? Okay, well, so if you do 3 minutes of 4 times a week, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you are an athlete and you challenge your nervous system up and down, or you travel from New York City in April and then you go to LA and then you go to San Francisco and you change chemistry like that, if you go from 20 degrees to 120 degrees in Austin or wherever you're at, climate wise, environmentally wise, if you change time zones and disrupt your biology and you marry that protocol, that's not feasible.
Right.
So you have to be adjustable naturally off of how you're handling stimulus in your own life. And I think that comes into the way in which you're breathing. So if I go into the same temperature of cold tub 4 or 5 times a week, and one of those days I can't control my breath, or this is really crushing me, I think that's your breathing's the tell to get out and not marry the objective protocol in which you felt like you had to religiously follow. And I think that's one of the things that, again, I'm not going to say I'm right or accurate in this. I think we can all discover our own things and we can find what works for ourselves. But I would say in the last 10 years of really practicing breath work and cold exposure, I would say recently that seems to be, to me, in my understanding, that seems to be where we're missing the boat just right now in this immediacy. We're so obsessed with objective protocols that we can't we're missing awareness to our breath. And does that make sense?
Yeah. And we're open to the opportunity of, hey, we're all different hip sockets. We're all
Yeah.
different blood work,
Yeah.
but do this specific time frame for everyone in the ice. What,
Yeah.
why can't the other perspective apply uh, for the recovery aspects and then making this awareness connection? I understand your logic. I guess they're just looking for an easy layup. Let's just do this. Check this box.
Yeah, and shout out to our guy Logan Gelbrick. He always highlighted this for me, which I never really thought about it. I did a presentation at Deuce a few years ago out in LA, and we were having this exact topic of discussion. And I didn't think about it then as like something that would be relevant, I suppose, to teach now. But I've always, my favorite number is 15. And whether this helps people who are listening or not, as a protocol for them so they can understand their things. If you do 15 breaths, 5 breaths a minute, you do 3 minutes. And that just lined up with me. For one, it was my favorite number, but then physiologically, it also makes sense, right? Because if you maintain 5 breaths a minute, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, with a slight pause after the inhale and the exhale, you're right around that. You're hovering around 5 to 6 breaths a minute, which in a natural state of coherence, if you were to sit down and breathe like that, just in your living room or outside, your central nervous system will completely neutralize. Right? You see this on heart rates, variabilities, recoveries, all this stuff. So that's why coherent breathing, the pendulum of that, it neutralizes your CNS. So I've always thought of it as, if I can maintain coherent breathing in the cold tub, and I think for the listeners, this is something you can challenge yourself on, and you can really learn how you're handling cold, is don't look at a clock, have a clock to the side of you. And can you do 15 breaths through your nose? And if you need the first 5 to be in through the nose, out through the mouth, just to get yourself into it, the last 10, you should try to be all nasal in, nasal out. And can you count your breath? So you have something to be aware of mentally and cognitively and focus on, and follow that. And then at 15 breaths, can you get out and look at the clock and see how close you are to 3 minutes? And obviously, we're masters of ourselves, so we get better at that. But eventually, you can get away from the clock and pull it, and you can just be at 15 breaths. And where I mean by that is, some days I do 15 breaths and I'm in there for a minute 30. That's a great thing to what we're talking about. That's, my CNS isn't there, but I did 15 breaths. I got to get out. I'm not going to do the 3 minutes. I got to get out. Some days I do 15 breaths and I literally look at it, it's been 4 minutes. And it's like, I had a ton of space. Like, where was that availability coming from? And I think you let me know what you think about this, as from your experience in coaching and your thoughts. But I think that has come to become a really good tool that I've given to athletes a lot, and they've found a lot of success in.
Yeah, I love that. Right now, practically speaking, I was just 3 minutes, set a timer, and let's just aim to relax. But I know,
Yeah.
let's get to that timer. Let's get to that timer, and then connecting this to coaching. So I coach high school lacrosse and
Okay.
control the long-term athletic development, and 10 minutes of warm up. It's not the same dynamic warm up. It changes and evolves. In season, we focus on injury prevention, but if I look at the span of 4 years for kids, that's a long-term development model. 10 minutes of
Yeah.
warm up, 30 times 35 practices a season times 4 years. That's great development time versus the same dynamic
Yeah,
warm up.
man. Wow.
So now
Yeah.
I'm actively leading it. I let the kids lead the counts of the reps, but I'm choosing the movements, coaching that, and then this is my time to also teach them self-awareness, where most coaches use the warm
Mm.
up to, pal around and give them a hard
Yeah.
time. And well, now I'm just watching their movement, watching their body language, watching their hamstring calf tightness, and then
Mm.
bringing this awareness. I can see the movement change, but now asking
Yeah.
them, hey, how your hamstrings feeling? So trying to
Yeah.
build the mind muscle connection, which I do want to get to momentarily here. So
Yeah.
your
Beautiful.
book has and introduced me to now senses. So tapping into to my guys and helping expand their awareness through senses, which we're going to lead to. But just to wrap it on breath, you spoke on nasal breathing. I do want to help differentiate for the listeners, especially our coaches at the high school level: nasal breathing, mouth breathing, and diaphragmatic.
Dramatic.
I'm
Yeah.
tough with that word too. Breathing as
Yeah.
well. So just maybe the purpose for each of those, and then
Yeah.
connect it to the practices that you just introduced.
Yeah. Make sure if I get offline, I want you to point at me and tell me to stop, because this is important. So let's make sure I don't go on. Let's make sure I don't go on my rants here. Let's start. Let's start extremely practical. So you want to look at breathing as, I consider it 3 layers. And it's just like your pyramid, the bottom base, just like the old food pyramid back from elementary school. The bottom base is your mechanics. That's kind of where we can just cue in on that diaphragmatic breathing. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the bottom base is anatomy and the mechanics. Like when you're looking at your athletes' bodies, okay, that's how I'm looking at someone breathe right away. I don't say anything. I just look at how they breathe. And that's, I'm not going to go, well, I'm not going to rant. Let's stay on it. So you look at how they breathe. That's the anatomy. That's the mechanics. Then we go up the second layer. That's physiology. This is hard not to highlight as like the specialty of breathing, because breathing can change the physiology and influence it, which is what makes it so magical. But I don't think you get influence over physiology without healthy mechanics and a foundation, which I think is the basic across all of our movement patterns of anything we teach, right? Across all sports. And that's where I go back to the original story I told earlier. The third part of the pyramid is kind of that, it could even be that self-actualization point, but that's psychology. So it's mechanics, physiology, psychology, in that order, because it's simple. The principles are the same. So if in the mechanics, and for people who can kind of see this, your diaphragm sits like an umbrella underneath your rib cage, right? So if people are sitting there, your diaphragm sits like this umbrella. When you inhale, it flattens like a frisbee, right? And that's why when you're lifting, right, you know how when you take that big inhale before you go down for the squat, you kind of create that intra-abdominal pressure, and you have that safety belt, that natural safety belt. Okay, that is horizontal movement of the diaphragm. That's why you get that frisbee action, that flattening. So as someone who's even listening to this right now, if you're sitting in a chair, start breathing slow in and out through your nose, and just try to feel if your back can breathe into the chair. Can I feel the back of my ribs breathing into the chair? Can I feel the expansion of the side of the ribs? Yeah, feel it, right? And while you're doing that, the back is the hardest thing to breathe, because we breathe so easily into the belly and into the front. But if you can feel that into the back of the chair, you're starting the process of getting away from this vertical breathing. You're getting into this horizontal breathing. And that's what you're really trying to access mechanically. So if you're trying to test yourself mechanically, just take your shirt off or have minimal clothing and look in a mirror and take deep breaths. And we're taking deep breaths naturally. The natural state of society right now is we breathe into our neck, into our shoulders. We do that when we do our deep breath. Okay, that's okay. It's natural. It's part of the process, but it's also part of the rewiring process. We need to get rid of that. So we need to breathe wide, and you want to think 360 degrees, that safety belt, but I'm breathing horizontal. And that's the flattening. So as you're doing this, even you, let's do this together. Take your hands and cup the side of your rib cage. Yeah, like just right there, like you're clamping a wall or a table. That's beautiful. And breathe yourself into your back of your thumbs. And I can see you perfectly. This is great. Breathe into your thumb and your index finger. When you inhale, do you feel the ribs coming out first? They kind of come out and then they lift up.
Yeah.
And then when you exhale, that's beautiful. When you exhale, they should come down and in. Do you feel those ribs moving?
Yes.
Yes. So that movement goes back to the word you used about awareness. That movement is controllable. We can do it instantaneously. You can get yourself to do that. And now all of a sudden, this is where I think the method, that's the principle. How do I get myself to breathe horizontally? How do I get the diaphragm to expand instead of getting me vertically? And when you're doing it consciously, it's easy. The difficult part is we breathe unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So unconsciously, we don't breathe like that. We breathe into our neck and our shoulders. And this happens obviously in sport when we're tired or fatigued, and that's okay. But you want to look at mechanically sound. How can I create this unconscious movement to work for me? And how do I get that to breathe well regularly? And I think that's where you have to train it. So you're training, the methodology of training can get wildly diverse. You can put weights on your belly. You can have someone grip for you, whatever. You can stare in a mirror. I always tie like a band, a TheraBand or whatever those, like the skinny TheraBands. I'll throw those around the bottom of the ribs and just have people breathe into them horizontally, whatever it takes to get that movement that you just had. But as a coach, before I go up to physiology, what are you feeling from that, from like the most simple thoughts?
I mean, it's easy buy-in. So I used to establish general box breathing. So I would be setting on time of 4-4-4 to bring awareness, but now I have a tactile cue where they can feel if they're doing it right versus me just on a stopwatch.
Perfect. And you can do that in a sauna, right? You can breathe like that in a sauna. You can breathe like that in a cold tub. And that's where you can, so that will move us up the chain. Right? Cool. Go up to physiology, nasal mouth breathing. So this moves us up the chain. And this is where I think modalities become really powerful for the mechanics of breathing. So if we are always maintaining that bottom base, the old ancient yoga saying is, if you can't breathe in a position, you don't own the position. And I think that is so true in any aspect of life, but it's so true in sports, right? If someone can't breathe underneath the bar, they don't own the bar. If someone can't breathe in any movement that they do in any sport, it does not matter. You do not own the position. I'm in baseball primarily, so it's like you see hitters and pitchers, anytime they come out of the delivery, it doesn't matter. Like I'm not going to say breathing's the answer to that, but your breathing was dysfunctional because you just don't own the movement. So it's just something to always have a baseline foundation of. It's also in the middle of the body. And before I highlight this physiology part, one of the reasons why you want to train mechanically your diaphragm is your diaphragm doesn't have nerve endings like the rest of the body does. So you do need to create an awareness to the tacticalness of it and become aware of the movement. It's not like a bicep that tells you it's fatigued. The diaphragm cannot do that because it has to work all the time. That's why I'm building it and making it consciously powerful and more horizontal for you is positive. So if we take all that stuff, we move up the second layer and we go into physiology. I think this is where you make your this is where you make your money, in my opinion, as any person, because this is where you can learn your practices. This is where you can learn the protocols and you can start to implement objective training, whatever fits you. Some people like really fast breathing, some people like slow breathing, whatever. You already said this earlier. We're all different. Well, this is why I say you make your money here. But if we go to physiology, I'll use you again as somewhat of the student in this position, and I'll answer it for you just so we can keep moving through this. But take a deep breath through your nose right now as I'm talking, and just become aware of deep breathing through the nose. And as you're doing that, just keep repping it out and slow and deep. As you're doing that slow and deep, mentally, what part of the body is moving first? Don't have to be right. Don't have to say anything to me yet. Just plug in what you think the answer to that is. Now, next, let's go to the mouth. Take a deep breath through the mouth. And what do you feel moving first? And nature designed this. And everyone who's listening can be doing this along with us. There should be an initial movement that happened, and there should be a difference from the mouth and the nose. Did you feel it? Even though I told you I was going to answer it, did you feel it?
Mouth was belly first.
Okay, reverse that.
Okay.
So, no, it's okay. Take a deep breath through your mouth. The cool thing is you see it on the film too, so you could see your body move differently.
Well, now I
should feel that right up in. You feel the nose lower.
Nose, yeah, lower. And now, yeah, definitely chest for my mouth.
With the mouth?
Yeah. I'll have to go back to the tape.
Go back to check tape, dude.
Yeah.
Check tape. As you're doing that, you should feel When I breathe through my mouth, I feel like I'm more upper chest. I feel back of the ribs, upper back of the ribs. When I breathe through my nose, I should feel like I'm a little bit lower. And now you're thinking about it, so you're making it conscious. But naturally, when you're doing this, even do this with athletes, and you'll be able to kind of see it, right? And even
Mhm.
when you're training people, you can see it. But the point I'm making of this is that is the starting grounds of understanding the difference between nose and mouth breathing. Because as people are listening to me, even if you're listening, just start being conscious of breathing in and out through your nose. You can feel that diaphragm expand, and you can kind of feel the body get widened, and you can feel yourself breathing lower. Well, the way in which gravity sets us up is all the blood sits at the bottom of the lungs. So when I nasal breathe, it's a deeper breath. I actually get into the lower part of the lungs, and that pulls the diaphragm down. And as it pulls it down, now all of a sudden that the bottom of the lung is filled with this stuff called alveoli. It's where we exchange our oxygen and our CO2.
Mhm.
And that exchange is also filled with all these parasympathetic type. And I know I'm saying some words. The parasympathetic is just, it's healthy. It's rest. It's adaptive. It's advantageous. It's oxygenated. So you have this low, deep breathing sensation that funnels into your heart and in through the rest of the body. And that's the oxygen exchange that goes through the muscle tissue when you breathe through the nose. When you breathe through the mouth, think about watching like a wrestler who starts panting, or a boxer who starts panting at the end compared to the beginning. Or you see this in kickers that start breathing really fast before they even did anything. You see this in young kids all the time who they start panting. I just had a baby. You see this in the baby, like they start crying. And that mouth breathing is upper lung breathing. It's the top tier lobes of the lung, which has less exchange, as you can imagine, because of pure gravity. So now I have less exchange of oxygen, CO2. I'm more sympathetic, which is fight or flight driven at the top of the lung. And that's super close to the brain stem in the back of the brain, which is our fight or flight and our rest and adapt. It's our sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's our nervous system. It's the duality of that. And so breathing alone will tell the brainstem what state you're in. So if I'm panting, well, then my nervous system is perceiving this as unsafe. So I'm going to freeze, and then I'm going to either fight or flight type deal.
Mhm.
If I'm breathing slow and in through the nose, my nervous system is perceiving this as safe. I can get deeper into position. I get more fluidity through my nervous system, my oxygen into my muscle tissue, all these things. And so this is why, if I'm looking at athletes, a lot of times I have athletes put water in their mouth, don't drink the water, and do your dynamic warm up. So now you need to not only own positions, you need to nasal breathe. So you need to be parasympathetic, which allows me to move through the positions, to loosen myself up, stretching myself out. And now when we get into training or competition, throw it out the window, breathe however you want. And for the listeners, I've always said, breathe through your mouth only when you eat, talk, or train heavily. Other than that, you should be nasal breathing your entire life, because nasal breathing is the key to oxygen. And if we have oxygen going through us, we're healthy.
What
So
about breathing through our eyelids?
the old, what movie is that?
Bull Durham.
The old baseball coach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just told the guy who's got a bullpen today, I told him a bunch of those breathing through your eyelids. Yeah, breathe through your eyelids for the sensei,
Yeah.
the absolute purity of it. Um, I think that's a good start. I want to go a little bit further on nasal versus mouth breathing, but does that paint a picture a little bit?
Yes. And practical nuggets for people to try. I love the water in the mouth, almost a force, and then
Yeah.
there's awareness. I swallowed it or I spit it out. So now we can rock
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, and if you don't want to use water, just tape your mouth.
Yeah.
Just tape your mouth and do minor aerobic, or go for a walk and tape your mouth, and just become aware of that. I think the easy part, if we get science driven on nasal mouth, and I'll be short with this, it's really simple. The mouth is for more air in, more air out. It's literally that simple. So think of the times in which you need more air, in which you need to get air out. You're going to use the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of the mouth doesn't have any of the access points that the nose has for the health of the body. There's no hair in the mouth. There's no the nasal hairs, as you guys can be familiar with. There's no blocking of particles in the air that stop us from the mouth. That's why when we get sore throats or we feel things or we have a dry mouth, Having a dry mouth is a parasympathetic or a sympathetic tone. It's a fight or flight tone. That's why you feel more stressed compared to when you have saliva in the mouth. Saliva is parasympathetic. It's rest and digest because you've been nasal breathing. So you've been getting this drippage, this saliva drippage. So that's the big thing of the reason why the mouth breathing is not, it's not productive in terms of biology and physiology, in terms of health. The nose, on the other hand, not only does it have these like walls, it has these terminates, which are like walls in your nose, which stops things from getting through them. It has hair, so it stops particle or pathogens or moldy environments from getting into your body. It literally protects you. So it's like a defense center. It's also smaller, so it has time to process what you're bringing in. And then I also just talked about this recently. I think for all the breathing coaches and my friends out there who are obsessed with breathing, everyone's obsessed with the nitric oxide production of nasal breathing, and how when we actually breathe through our nose as opposed to our mouth, we actually produce nitric oxide in the body, which is a vasodilator. So that dilator allows more blood flow to work through you. So if I think about this, if I go for a long walk, a long aerobic walk, and I maintain nasal breathing, I'm literally maintaining an openness of my blood, and I'm able to stay aerobic. Aerobic is oxygen, anaerobic is no oxygen. We can imagine what happens. You know how that is when you train, you get anaerobic, you get the lactic acid, you burn out, you get fatigued, you get sore. Okay. What I'm trying to say is, how long can you maintain oxygen aerobic capacities and states, and then use the anaerobic parts of you, the mouth breathing parts of you, as like boosters?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to think or do that is to try to maintain nasal breathing your entire life outside of eating, talking, or training hard. Right. And so that's where I think it kind of turns into getting really fun and fascinating with the two. And that's where it takes us all the way back to the saunas and the cold tubs. If you can't maintain nasal breathing in the cold, you're not adapted. You're not ready. You're not in a position where your nervous system can handle this environment. And this is where we need to be careful, because why would you give up fuel in a cold tub as opposed to your sport? If we're talking specifically for athletes,
Mm-hmm.
why would you give that up? You don't have that much points of breathing. So don't give up any anaerobic activity in a cold tub. Don't do it. It's the same thing with the sauna. You see guys breathe in and out through the nose the entire time. The second they go to mouth breathing, they could keep the same cadence protocol, and you will see, if you track it, you'll see the nervous system shift. You'll see it go from parasympathetic activity to sympathetic activity. And this is where we're missing, I think, largely, and this is unfair of me to say that. I shouldn't say that. Where I think we could be misunderstood, and myself included, is sometimes our recovery modalities end up becoming our training modalities, and we largely miss the understanding of the two perspectives. And we thought we just went and recovered in a sauna and an ice tub, and in reality, we just went and trained in a sauna and an ice tub.
Yeah, especially in the length of a season. So you're
Yeah.
feeling, or you're applying those tools as recovery, and it's not doing what you feel it is or think it is, and then performance suffers.
Yeah. And then the finale of that is obviously psychology. Psychology is a byproduct of all those. So I think those were ranty-ish, but I hope that hits the blocks.
But very, very much so, and educational. And we're creating awareness for coaches to start to observe and see, which is a great segue observation into your book, Without Words. So speak to us
Yeah.
about the origin of the title, and that previous season with San Francisco, where you came up with these concepts, tested these concepts, and then started to put them on paper, that led to this book.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me over the last couple of years was, like I just told you, I think that I've been inundated, as we all are, with a mass overhaul of technology, and needing objective answers and needing the protocol. And I don't think that is outside of the scope of materialism. I think we need that, and it is what it is. What was hard for me was I didn't feel internally a couple years ago egotistically for many years, I felt like I could change people because I told you that story I had, that moment I had with God in 2015 in the water. And when you have such an awakening of self, the only thing if you turn into your ego mind again, you just want to give that to everybody. I wanted to tell the world that I no longer have the yips, and here's the way that you cure everything. It's breathing, cold, sauna, sunlight, grounding, and this is what you do. Boom, 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 boom. Now, professionally, that ego drove me to madness, but it also drove me into material success. It got me into the big leagues. And I don't want to deny that because it did allow me to write a book. It got me to believe in myself without degrees and certain things. And it got me to trust in my process so deeply that it made me a major league baseball coach at the age of 31. And I'm not denying that as my gratitude for that experience. That was an amazing experience. I think what the big leagues did for me personally, which came out in that book, is that I went into the big leagues to change Major League Baseball and the industry of sports. I wanted to create a holistic environment for sports. And I've always believed if you could do that at the major league level, it would trickle down effect, top bottom style. And I envisioned that immersing itself into the youth of America. The youth of America would be about breathwork and walking barefoot. Like that was just my crazy dream vision. But for me personally, the big leagues actually changed me, which was the entire irony of everything, because I got into this environment that was so big, so drastic, so much things going on. It's very societally driven. It's perceived on the surface. Everybody can watch it. It's $1 billion industry. And that opened me up, like to simply put it that way. It opened me up to realize how complex we've become and how complex we are as a society, and how profoundly being healthy is actually really simple. But that's the hardest part, is the simplicity of being healthy. And I think that my anger and disrupted corruption of trying to figure out how to make it so simply easy in this huge environment, it actually changed me because it made me realize that I can't change this thing. And who am I to even think I could change this thing? And why would I need to change this thing? And all I really had access to was changing myself. And I realized in 2022, I was living the same lifestyle I'd always lived, but I did a full major league season. And at the end of the season, I was exhausted. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was feeling anxiety again, and I was feeling all these things that I had. And the 2023 season was, this is for me, my personal story. I didn't do this out of any, I don't think, addictions or issues, but I wanted to be sober for 2023. And I was the first time I didn't indulge in any alcohol, like a sip of alcohol, for a major league season. And I thought that was impossible at the time. I'd grown up in sports. Have had alcohol. It's whatever. It's a social thing. I just wanted to challenge myself to that. I wanted to challenge myself to the basic principles. I wanted to do this, and I had no intention of coaching anybody. I just wanted to do it personally. And in 2024, now I'm almost 2 years sober now, which has been incredible. But in 2024, I was so confused off of influence and trying to understand how to help people understand the simplicity of health, that I wrote the book Without Words, which you'll find out, I'm sure, in a lot of the underlying meanings of that book, is that my perspective towards teaching has drastically changed, because I'm not sure, A, we can teach anybody anything, and B, if we could, should we? And that's the second one's a little bit more intimidating to ask myself. Should we teach anybody anything? Because we ourselves are flawed, and we ourselves are trying to understand this whole thing in general. And what came out of that thought process was the book Without Words, Mastering the Art of Being. And my current grip on perspective or society is that we are a mind-body vehicle, which we can physically, tangibly see and understand. We can make practical protocols for that. We can understand what injury is not, what success. We can create all our benchmarks. We can do all this stuff. We can say the protocols of the sauna, the protocols for the breathing. We can create the literature. We can study the things. We can get the curriculums. We can have the degrees. But then there's this presence of self, this self-actualized thing that we cannot measure. We can't know what it is. And what I think I've come to understand is that the platforms that we choose in life, the things that we go down right now, we're in the platform of podcasting. I think that what we do is we materially create characters. We play those characters through the mind and body that we can understand and commute surface level language to. But behind the character is your soul, which you are without words. You can't. And the first question of that book is, "Who am I?" And I don't think you can tell someone who you are. But I've been telling athletes, or been told as an athlete for 20 some years, who are you? And if you aren't successful, you need to figure out who you are. And my confusion with that question made me write that book. It was, well, who am I? And who are you? And how could we ever know the depths of who we are individually? And I think from a spiritual sense, sports is nothing more than a platform that exposes you to the awareness of self. And you need to use a mind and body to get to the depths of that exposure. And therefore, it's almost a duty or a birthright to unbelievably actualize the simplicity of being healthy. And it should be the greatest honor of yourself to maintain health. It should be the key principle of yourself. You should look at your breath, your nutrition, your movement, your sleep, your social connection. And if you have a leak in any of those chains, you're going to have a mental or physical injury. And when you're not healthy, you're not useful. And therefore, you've lost access to deepening your understanding of this life. I know it gets deeper and has a spiritual edge to it, which is different than any of the work I ever produced, but it was calling to me. So I did it. I just wrote it.
Yeah. And I took the time, especially with chapter 1, just to establish like what you were aiming to introduce there. And then, I mean, reflect on my career as an athlete, and then transitioning into coach, and then into teacher, into mentor,
Yeah.
in all these different phases. Now 16 years in the industry, where
Yeah.
the most proud of those different levels that I have is coach, when I'm actually working with athletes.
It's beautiful.
I still get the opportunity to present and teach, and then individuals coming for mentorship. That's when the fun begins. And there was a moment where I didn't own that as a mentor. Wanted to continue to learn. So people would ask me questions and push them away, other coaches in the industry. And then finally a buddy of mine called me out for that, just how I guess I had closed that door. So then this book allowed me to really reflect on that 16 years. And then especially the last 4 or 5, where my understanding of the social emotional development of people had really just taken a whole new perspective and development. So yeah, I mean, this got me thinking. And then how you describe the book here, who we were to who we are to who we can be, like that that is beautiful to me, and really
Thank you.
encouraging as I continue to move as an athlete, to
Yeah.
coach, to teach, to mentor, through this whole thing, and using sport as that opportunity for me. And then a big theme of the podcast is sports don't teach lessons, captains and coaches do. Your teammates, your leader, team. Baseball taught us nothing. It's just a ball.
Right.
However,
Right.
the people involved within that are what led us to understand us.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
The last 2, I don't know if it's the last 2, but the chapters I do want to highlight are
Yeah.
auras. And this was new to
Yeah.
me. And
Yeah.
the mind body connection broken into different parts with the senses. So now I feel, working through the auras chapter, I don't know if this is one of Logan's friends, but also mutual friend Lindsay Matthews, BirthFit. I don't know if you had the
Okay.
opportunity to meet her, but she always spoke
Not
on
sure.
auras and energies, and I'd rather
Yeah.
and give her a hard time. But this was
Yeah.
a logical chapter that then got me thinking about energy and flow within the team. So I can I can feel, see it, and if a kid needs it, step in. If the team needs it, and that energy within the locker room or sideline, like I can feel that. But now is putting the the distances perspective in there. So speak to us a little bit about auras and energy, and then how that transitions into the mind body connection, not just a saying mind body connection, but how you
Yeah.
break it down in senses.
Yeah, so let's start with senses and get to chakra energy, aura energy. Those are kind of mixed into the two. You can kind of think of chakra as internal energy, aura energy as external energy. And there's 7 to both, which is really cool in the sense of how they're connected. And but beforehand, let's go to senses, which I think is a little bit more, maybe a little bit more practical to talk about or communicate on, and we can kind of wrap our heads around that stuff. It's my understanding that the way in which we are even doing this podcast right now, or anything that we're going to do today, I think our decision making processes, psychologically, is based off of the design of our current environment. So I don't, and this thought's been formed in my own opinion for many years. I don't think we're as conscious as we'd like to think we are. I think that we're the byproduct of the unconscious environment. So what I would mean by that is, like, if you're not studying the home in which you live in, or studying the city that you live in, or studying the team that you're involved in, or the colors, or the clubhouse, or the locker room, or the weight room, if you're not looking at the design of that and realizing that we're a bunch of organisms walking through those and moving through that space and that design, you're largely the byproduct of whatever that environment is, which is exactly how your breathing is. You are the byproduct of your unconscious breathing. If you are a chronic mouth breather, you are going to have health issues, period. And so that's your unconscious environment. It's poor breathing. Well, what would impact poor breathing unconsciously? Mold in the house, air pollution in the city, stimulus of sound, which makes you breathe faster, chaotic social relationships, which make you stressed out, breathe faster, breathe more, breathe anatomically unsound, processed food, bad food, makes you breathe, it's perceiving that as a poison, artificial stimulants. Like I said, I kind of talked about drinking, but if you're taking yourself up and down on crazy stimulants up, well, then you're going to have to come down. So if you just go through society, I know this seems kind of negative in a sense, but I think it's just becoming aware of how everything's built around you. It's really easy to go anywhere from point A to B, and every stopping point along the road has access to artificial coping. And so you unconsciously pick from the environment that is around you. That's kind of what I'm saying as an overarching philosophy of understanding sensory input, because now all of a sudden the senses take in the consideration of how they're perceiving the environment around them. So you're kind of getting external impact into internal understanding. You are the byproduct of the two of those. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is why nature in Finland and in Japan specifically, I went to Finland recently, so they're on top. Costa Rica is a great example. I was there last winter. There's forest bathing is something people can look up and try to understand. I think Harvard or Stanford did and I talked about it in the book. I'm drawing a blank on it. I did one of the researches either from Harvard or Stanford talking about people who walked in urban environments compared to nature environments and what that did to their physiology. We think of things as we just went for a walk, but we're not looking at the environment. And so this is why when you forest bathe or you go into nature, you understimulate all the senses and you naturally start to recover. Your heart rate changes, your blood pressure goes down, your respiratory rate slows down. And so the thing that I think people need to ask themselves is, the only thing that changed was the environment, because the senses are taking in different input, which
Mhm.
is why going outside right away in the morning is so healthy. You're getting sensory input. And so this is me defending that opinion of mine, in which I believe the importance of the senses through your eyes, your smell, your taste, your touch, all that stuff. And you get deeper senses, thermal regulation, which we kind of talked about. You have proprioception, senses, balance, all this stuff. But the major 5, which I think is the classic of all us understanding, I think that we're the byproduct of the unconscious environment around us that impacts our senses. And I think that that's why you see people in the weight room who listen to heavy metal music, all of a sudden they're really excited to lift. Why, if you go to an early morning game, people want to listen to reggae. At the end of the day, when you're by yourself studying for whatever reason, low quality hurts, jazz music makes you creative. And I think if you could pull yourself out for a second and understand that you don't need to consciously make yourself go into states, you can design the environment to put you into states. That's where the senses become valuable. And that's why you can start to make, as a human performance coach, you can start to design environments off wisdom rather than trying to acquire more knowledge. For example, how has it ever made sense to you intuitively to be under bright artificial lights at 11 o'clock at night when the sun's been down for hours? Just intuitively. You don't need to go research that. You can fact check and try to understand it, but intuitively, does that feel right? And it doesn't feel right because your senses don't want that input. So if you can become aware of sensory awareness, sensory input, you start to design your life to work for you. And that's a long-term process, but I think that's the point of what senses are. They just impact you. If I take cold water and I flick it at your skin, you're going to jump because the touch got a little sympathetic bite, a little fight or flight tone, right? And yeah, I think that's kind of, should I go further on that or how does that sound? Is that fair?
Fair, easy, simple. If they want to dive deeper, we got the book, but keep going down the
The
path.
auras and chakras.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden we got to talk about energy. And this has come to me. This is rather recent to me. A lot of the energy work that has really been impacting me and my teachings as of late has come through sound bathing and frequencies and drums. And this has all been, I've been studying indigenous tribes and I've been fortunate to be with some chief leaders over the last couple of years and really dive deep into drum ceremonies and these sort of things that are impacting stuff. But a lot of the ancient medicine practices that we've used have been based off of frequencies. So being able to promote sound and sensation to change the energy of the body. I'm really bummed that I'm indigenous healing, I think is the book I just read, and it's really bothering me. I can't remember it. I might be wrong on that, but the first part of the book is about how the shamans of the Pacific Northwest tribes used drumming as a drum circle. So if somebody in the tribe, and this might not necessarily be their tribe, I know this was a lot in the Minnesota tribes as well, but if someone has depression in the community, there's a leak in the community, not the person. So you would create a ceremonial drum ceremony from the way in which I understood it, and the drumming would connect all the nervous systems. And so now all of a sudden you would drop in. And I think that's why you've been in sports teams, right? Your whole life. It's like, think about what music does to a room and what the beat does to the energy. And when the room starts to create and flow together, it's magic. There's a reason why whoever wins the World Series next year, whoever gets interviewed is going to say this, and they're going to say it the next year, and the next year they're going to say, there was a time in our season when we were really struggling. We had some injuries. We were battling. We weren't quite sure, but then we knew we loved each other and we felt love in the room. I'm getting chills as I'm thinking about it. You're getting love in the room. And from that moment, we connected and we just had the right chemistry and we won. They're never going to talk about anything material. They're not going to talk about objectivity. They're going to talk about love. That's what's going to happen. And it's going to happen whoever wins the Super Bowl here. It's going to happen whoever wins the Stanley Cup. So what is love? And that's what drives a lot of the work for Without Words, is that it's a unmeasurable energy that we all have internally. And when we connect that with other people, the massness of that is unbelievable. And that's what you get to experience on teams or businesses or in families, and love with a significant other or friend, and animals, even nature. You just get to connect as one. And that's where I think, spiritually speaking, you'd understand the connection of love. Materially speaking, chakras are kind of, in a modern sense, it's just the nervous system. I'll just simplify it to its absolute core. It's literally just Easternized ancient verbiage of the disc of the nervous system from basically your pelvic floor, which is your root, all the way to the top of the pineal gland, which is your crown. And you have your third eye, you have your throat chakra, your heart chakra, you have solar plexus, you have the gut, the intuitive, all this stuff. But it's literally just disc that run up your nervous system. And if there's a clog in one of those discs, or they're not running smoothly internally, it's literally back to the initial thing we were talking about, physiology. There's a dysfunction in your physiology. So if you have a gut feeling, well, that's the ego speaking to you. And what disrupts the gut? If you bring in bad food and you disrupt your gut, you're disrupting part of your chakra system. But we don't have to use the word chakra. We could just talk about your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is from your body. Mind is not speaking accurately to itself. You have your body's trying to process this food. Your vagus nerve is frustrated with itself, and it's telling your mind that you are antsy and anxious or depressed or sad, whatever. And that's just the connection, the mind, body, mind connection. That's everything is everything. I think that I just have found in recent years, I've found a lot of relatability to just attaching that to the actual words of the chakras and understanding the root of the pelvic floor area, our grounding, our sexual energy, our healing energy, our emotional energy around the hips and all that stuff. Like, you can call it the pelvic floor and do pelvic floor exercises, or move and make sure the middle of your body is working well. You can call your glutes, you can do that stuff, or you can just work with the root. And I think that I've just found more comfortability in language around that, but I don't think there's any difference. They're slightly the same.
Yeah.
Aura is aura. Someone walks into the room, you feel their aura. But yeah, sorry, you were going to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I like that perspective. And then, so I've always felt like a kindred connection with Native American tribes, just the stories. And then through lacrosse, it's the medicine game, they call it. So then Northeast,
That's
New
beautiful.
York
Yeah,
area.
that's right.
So it's like America's true pastime, not baseball.
Yeah.
It's the first.
No, you're right.
Here.
You're right.
So it's
that's awesome.
Yeah, in the sense, like, going to the tribes for all this stuff, they didn't have any of our modern technologies, perspectives, ability to dissect and cut people open, but they were still able to find these without modern tech. So there's got to be some root, right, pun intended, there to it, and then it helps you understand, and then you can connect science easily. So it's you've got a range of perspectives to then make a connection with the person that you're trying to empower.
Yeah. Well said.
But yeah, so now auras, and this is, I'm just looking at the book, and then you do a great job on connecting the auras to the
chakras.
So now it's beautiful one-liner for each.
Yeah.
But yeah, the energies, so this was something in the layers. This is just cool to me.
Yeah, I think of it as, I'm trying to think of where I want to take that story. I think if you just start within, right, it's like the energy of the room and working yourself down. And I'm thinking about if I have touch, like if I touch you, just sometimes, why is it that sometimes just touching someone helps them, right? And so you have to ask yourself the question of, is massage therapy physical or mental or spiritual healing? What is it, right? What is the aspect of that immediate layer? And physical touch is incredibly important. There's a reason why teams for centuries have said teams who high five win. There's a connection there. And it's an energy, it's a transfer of energy. And I think that as you become more aware and you get outside of yourself, the more in tune you are internally, the stronger your aura is going to be out externally. And you're going to feel, just think of it as, I know it can seem very, trying to avoid the woo-woo-ish word of it, but let's just call it that. You have this eggshell around you of energy, and it kind of spreads out a few feet from you, right? When things come into your aura and it feels off, it's because you're sensing that internally, that internal external connection. But when you have love and connection and physical touch, that's our first essential, our layer. And that's why I said I use the example of teams. Now, if we step outside of how we can feel energy, I don't think that educationally we can get there as much as someone experiencing external aura. And if anyone sees a lot of my work, and I talk about sound bathing in there, and I do a lot of that with every athlete that I work with, we use some variation of sound. Mostly I use the crystallized bowls to create a low hertz, like a 528, 432 hertz, these low frequency parasympathetic hertz. And these are frequencies that you can't necessarily see, right? But think of it as the sun. You can't see the rays of the sun that touch your skin, but you feel the heat, right? And so that's an outer external energy force that's impacting you. Getting back to the senses, I want to stay on the sound bathing because this is practical and people can actually experience this. You can even, it's not as powerful, I think, without actually having sound bowls or instruments, but you can obviously go and look at those hertz I just used, type those in on YouTube, and just listen. Close your eyes and just listen, and allow the energy, that the aura outside of you, to influence your internal chakras, your nervous system. But I always liken it to the concept of, how when you're on a boat and somebody says something to you across the water, and the water, you hear it so clearly, you can hear it from like hundreds of yards away. Have you experienced this? I grew up in the Midwest, so we always were on lakes, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Not
Think of
per
it if
se.
you're on if you think of it if you're on a lake and someone yells in and you can hear them. Have you ever is that coming to mind or no?
I don't have a lot of lake experience. My only thought is Tommy Boy when he's out on that
Oh,
little
nice.
little boat and those
Perfect.
boys are talking some trash.
That's a bet. Okay, let's go with the Tommy Boy example. So they can hear him, right? They can
Yeah.
at least hear him, even though he's screaming in that one. But they can hear him. So the point is that sound travels really well across water.
Okay.
And you can attach sound and water, frequency and water, really well. Well, your body is, massively made up of water. 60-80% of it or so along those lines is in this water hydrated mode. So you have water all throughout your body. You're like a bag of water, basically a bag of cells in water. When you have frequency that comes from the external and it impacts through your layers of aura and it goes into you, now all of a sudden the water in your body, it starts to vibrate. And so that vibration is healing. And that's what heals through the disc, heals through the nervous system. And so, once again, it's not talking yourself into this adaptive state or this meditative state. The vibrancy of the outside aura goes into your inside disc, your nervous system funnels, your chakras, and it will start to shake them up so that the bulbs can be free and everything can flow from the crown down to the root. And you can be able to neutralize your system, homeostasis naturally. And now all of a sudden, in those positions of health, you drop into mindfulness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You drop into your meditative states or your recovery states. And I think that's a good example. I hope that's a good example to try to extend on just like the layers of external energy that get into your internal energy. But I mean, as far as like reading about it, just read about auras. I'm just trying to create a storybook form to create metaphors of how energy transfers in and out of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see the connection visually, and then just getting the wheels spinning about how I can bring that to a team. So finding different tools, and we got a training camp this weekend. We're going away overnight with the high school dudes. So I'm in charge of all team building and training. So I'll find a way to get creative with this stuff.
Yeah, just think of it as, like I said, think about it as what state do you want to be in? If you want to be in a fight or flight state, turn up the volume, turn up the breathing, get the energy going, get the drums beating, like get the movement going, and you're creating the external field of energy to impact the internal, and you will see a conscious behavioral change. If you want to down regulate, well, change the sound, change the frequency, and they just work in conjunction. They work together is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's just an accumulation. I try to use the book to talk about aura fields and the nervous or the chakras, just try to give a different point of view to the Western world. to just communicate with different language, but it's literally nothing different than hearing, seeing, touching, walking, thermal regulation, all those things, and then your nervous system, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and adapt. It can be confused only by language, but we are the same. It's the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good note to wrap that up. And then again, I took my time reading it to really understand it, but it's well thought out throughout the entire book. And then like it got my wheels spinning, and certainly a perspective shift on my end. So I'm grateful for Logan for making our connection. I got a couple quick questions, just some
Yeah,
fun
Lamb.
here.
Yeah.
Walkout song. What were you going
Oh
with when
wow.
you were stepping up?
My walkout song was "Stand Up and Shout," and it was a Mark Wahlberg movie. Do you remember that movie? I can't remember the movie. Rockstar. I think it was the movie called
Ah,
Rockstar.
yeah,
Do you remember that movie with Mark
yeah.
Wahlberg?
Long hair
Stand
and
Up and Shout.
Jennifer Aniston.
Yes, dude. That was my walkout song.
That is probably the first time I've ever heard that as the choice here. Um,
Yeah, I was a closer, so I was trying to come in loud.
yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I'm sure there's some energy and connection to people's walkout song for whether they're a pitcher, whether they're coming up to bat. I'm
Mhm.
from Houston, so Astros fan through and through, and Billy Wagner, he just got
Nice.
uh, Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, Enter the Sandman. And dude, freaking in Minute Maid Park, freaking lights coming down, and then just the freaking Metallica starting up.
Electric.
And Wagner,
Yeah.
he didn't dead sprint. He took his sweet ass time just
That is so tight.
getting to the mound.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I'm
he
in on that.
that just talk about the energies of a stadium. Like, final thought on that, like I've been to, dude, hundreds and hundreds of games, especially Astros $2 Tuesdays, growing up, and they sucked forever. But then they started to
Yeah.
get good, and I would return back to Houston and go to playoff games with my dad. And dude, the energy, like just in the town, and then you step into the arena, like it's something, winning and losing, just feeling it as a fan in baseball. I love it.
100%. That's what makes it beautiful.
Yeah. And final question here. I'm probably not going to change my philosophy on this. For
Yeah.
breathing, fatigue, and during games, like resting with your hands on your knees, resting with your hands on your heads, or like a power position. What do you feel is the optimal for recovery to redirect and get your ass back out on the field?
Wow, I love it, dude. Well, as a player, when I was playing, the rules were never on your head. So I grew up in that era of mental resilience, I suppose, that we were absolutely buried if we had our hands on our head. And or no, sorry, hands on our knees.
Knees, yeah.
So flipped that around. So I came up in the era here, and you had to be up top. I think, obviously there was you're probably familiar with the research that came out a few years ago that said you got optimal breathing with hands on the knees. Do you remember that?
I
I'm
do. And
drawing it. It's been a minute since I've.
yeah,
Go
that
ahead. Sorry.
that's why I'm like, no, I'm not going to listen to that. You're
Yeah,
showing
yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
opponents
I
you're
remember when
tired.
that came out. Yeah, I remember when that came out. Hands on the hips. I'm thinking about how I currently train. That's kind of how I feel more comfortable. But you know what? I think it's an immersion of all three. I think that I've found just like pacing and walking and being able to continue movement and use my breath
Mhm.
to unwind has been the best recovery modality. I'll give an extremely practical tool, and then we'll come back to the debate of those three. But a gear system, which was brought to me by a mentor of mine years ago, Brian McKenzie. I think they run Shift Adapt now. I might screw up that name. I think it's just called Shift. But him and Rob Wilson, I'm not familiar with what Rob Wilson's doing nowadays, but Rob and them had brought to my attention the gear system years ago, which I've really enjoyed communicating. So the just think of it like this. We won't go through all of them necessarily, but think of your breathing as like a car. And to be at 0 to 25 miles an hour in the neighborhood is pure, calm, quiet nasal breathing. We'll just call that a low gear. And I'm kind of tailoring this to my own speech of this. You can look up their gears and they go way deeper. But once you move up the chain and you kind of get into that 45 gear, we'll say that's in through the nose, out through the mouth. You're kind of revving up. And then when you get on the highway and you're in that full gear mode, you're driving 70 miles an hour, your mouth breathing. So I think that came to mind off your question and why I'm going to use it to talk about recovery of breath is the mechanics. I think as long as the diaphragm can move and you can be able to pull in air according to the gear system that you want to use in that moment is accessible, then I think it's whatever works, especially in competition. And I say that because, as you know, any athlete who is breathing heavily or training or fatigued, try to give them information and see how well they can cognitively articulate anything. They can't.
Inverse
The rationale
relationship.
of the
Yeah.
brain, yeah, it's gone away. So it's what position works for you to breathe in that position works for you would be my answer. And I've been around pro athletes for X amount of years solely. So I mean, if you tell a pro athlete one thing, sometimes they'll just tell you to buzz off, and you got to get used to that. So there's a little bit of a difference there from when I was coaching. I've just been so used to these guys having that mentality from time to time. But as I just talked just through gearing up, the process of recovery is, can you have the process of gearing down? And you see this a lot in baseball with people who leg out like a triple on 2 outs. And then they come into the dugout and they only have like a minute and they got to go out in the field and they're just still like, it's just really stressful on them, especially a game like baseball, because it's so extreme start and stop for a significant amount of time. But I think that where we miscalculate recovery breathing is, can you gear yourself down how we geared ourselves up? So a lot of times people hear what we've been talking about this entire show and they go, oh, well, this Harvey guy was talking about how recovery breathing and nasal breathing is all oxygenated breathing. So I'm breathing really fast. I need to breathe through my nose. And they just try in the wrong style without gearing themselves down. And
Yeah.
they completely hurt the system. So a lot of times it's like, if you're breathing really heavily, if you're in a high gear, and there's 5 total gears. I'm just using a short version of 3 here. If you're breathing in and out through your mouth, your engine is revved and you're running on the highway metaphorically, and you have a moment to recover, you don't just go from the highway to the stop light. You merge yourself off the highway and you come down slow. And I think that metaphor helps with the breath, because I can, and I'm trying to pendulum this through my mouth. Now, wherever I get that is where I get it. I got to get that though. And I think if you get into that slouched, compromised position, poor body language position, I don't think you can get there. So I need to gear that thing mouth in, mouth out. And then this is where the magic happens. Can I find a position of peace where I can go in through the nose, out through the mouth, and I can start to recover actually before I go back out onto the highway, I guess. I hope that I didn't answer your question because I didn't want to. So I answered it the way that I wanted to.
Well, I've found an answer in there. What position works best for you? I, as a high school sport and strength and conditioning coach, I get the opportunity to introduce what position is best for them
Heck yeah.
in their
Yeah, you do.
careers moving forward, if they want to continue on in athletics past high school.
Yeah.
And that position is standing tall and strong.
Yeah.
And in a sport like lacrosse, which we sub quick on the fly like hockey, I need situational awareness. I can't just
Wow. Yeah.
I can't just sprint and call for timeouts to take off all my batting
Right.
gear to hand it to the kid and take a breather. If lines change or we transition from offense to defense, and I need my one line out there, you
You gotta
bust
be out there.
tail. You got to go out there.
Right.
You can slow the pace of the game down once we have the right personnel on
Yeah.
there. So there's the opportunity in lacrosse to do that. But at the same time, I'll put you in the best position to optimize your breathing in a tall, aware
Yeah.
position.
Yeah, I mean, I love that answer. I think the issue could come from the cop out scenarios, right? Where it's like, what's your pick your poison. I mean, are you really going to argue against positive body language, strong, powerful body language? We just talked about energy. I mean, that is a true effect of the hierarchy. People who just naturally sit on the hierarchies of anything or in the power positions have powerful body language, period. So are you going to really rely on some literature and debate? There's so much that goes into anything and everything. And that's where I think if you're setting a standard of that position, can I rationally think in all these positions? Can I hold and maintain body position and power? Now, if you add a little bit of breathing, like we just did, protocols to that, I don't see how that's not advantageous to anything.
Boom. Tasted science. Well, dude,
Yeah.
Harvey, thanks, man. We ran long, but this is valuable, and I appreciate it. So I'll link up with Without Words, and then the your first book, Breathe, Focus, Excel, into the show notes, so people can have a quick, easy
Okay.
click and link out to it. Again, thanks for
Cool.
looking for the connection. And
Yeah.
yeah, man, where can people go to continue to follow you, tune into your show? I'm not going to call it a podcast.
Yeah.
And continue to learn from you for all your growing and learning and giving to the world.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I keep it simple. Harvey J. Martin. Just the website's harveyjmartin.com. My socials are at Harvey J. Martin, Twitter, Instagram. That's got to be the same for YouTube too. My wife set up the YouTube recently. I think that's just Harvey J. Martin. So everything should be consistent across the board. Obviously, my podcast that comes out, I do a solo show and a guest show, and that's just a moment with Mart. You had alluded towards it earlier on Spotify. They're on Spotify, YouTube, all the places that you find podcasts. And I just started that like 2 weeks ago. So that's in its extreme infant stages. I'm sort of finding and feeling and peeling into what I'm going after. But yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, I shared a little bit of my story on where I'm at currently with my perspective. I think a lot of my work, even the book I'm currently writing right now, it's just still driven in this vein of philosophy and faith and some of the perspectives that I found in these invisible-ish worlds, these non-tangible worlds. And I think that, do people like that or not like that? I don't know. I think you just follow what you're following.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you look back at my earlier work, you'll see a lot of tangible stuff, which is great. That's the first book I wrote. If you want to be tangible science literature, Breathe, Focus, Excel is incredibly that. It's all protocol driven. It's all practical. If you go to Without Words, I think I do a little bit of practicality, as you kind of mentioned, but a lot of it is a lot more into kind of my own journey, my own personal perspective. I also was able to, I wrote that, the publisher of that book, John Kohler, let me write that entire book. They didn't impact any of that, and so I was able to write that more freestanding. And then this next one is, I think, going to go even a little bit deeper, but that'll come out later on. So I'm not going to speak to that yet. But yeah, Harvey J. Martin, website, socials, and Moment with Mart on the podcast.
Boom. All right. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast. If you like what you heard here today, be sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show. If you want to check out Harvey's books, they are linked in the show notes below, especially Without Words. Highly recommend. This is a perspective shift. I certainly enjoyed it and continue. You can see all my bookmarks if we're watching on the YouTubes. And Focus, Breathe, Excel. I handed that out to Old Bull athletes to really dial in not only their cool down stretching, but also integrate this into their lifts so they can work on the conditioning, work on the strength training that's within the program, and truly maximize the limited time that they have to train. Thank you again for tuning in to Captains and Coaches Podcast and helping us raise the game. Namaste.